Hello from Dukascopy TV. We are talking about investment opportunities in Russia with Ms. Anastasia Vlasova. She is director from FGP Capital here in Geneva. Welcome, Ms. Vlasova, at Dukascopy TV.
Hello there.
So let's talk about the newest announcement of the Russian central bank to raise its reserves. What impact would this have on the ruble price?
Right, well, you probably heard that the central bank announced last week that it wants to raise the foreign reserves up to $500 billion, which means that it will be buying a lot of dollars in the market. And that's the market was surprised by this announcement because prior to that the central bank was talking about targeting the inflation, and there is a difference now in its stance, and it's targeting the reserves and not the inflation. What it meant, the direct impact on the ruble was negative, so the ruble went down and it took the market down, because what essentially that means is that every time the ruble will be appreciating, there is always a bid out there from the central bank who's buying, they'll be buying for the next 2 to 3 years, increasing their reserves. Why they're doing this? I think they want to have a cushion in case of another financial crisis, which is understandable. And also they help the real economy, because Russia is an export economy, and it is not in the interest of the government, the economy, the central bank to have the ruble appreciating. So de facto, they are capping any rise in the ruble in the foreseeable future.
And you also brought a chart.
Yes, this is a chart showing how the ruble behaved. So you do see the spike in December. That was in the middle of the crisis when there was a huge volatility. To remind our viewers that you did have a similar volatility in the Swiss franc in January, just a month later. And it was very funny that it did feel like when you're in Switzerland that you could be in an emerging market one day. So, yes, indeed, there was this big spike in December. Then the central bank fought off. They hiked the interest rates. So all the speculators had to back off. And then gradually the ruble started depreciating again. But then the second quarter of this year, as the oil price went up, ruble went up again.
So can you outline a little bit how the Russian ruble is linked to the oil, and maybe also what perspective is for the oil price and how this would affect the Russian economy?
I showed in another program a slide where how Russian stock market is linked to the oil, and it's one-to-one correlation. And you have almost exact correlation between the Russian ruble and the oil. I think it's our next slide. You can see that with the exception of this one spike, there is a very strong correlation between where Russian ruble is and where the oil price is. So because Russia is so dependent on oil, it's very easy. I always say to my clients, tell me where the price of oil will be, and I'll tell you where ruble will be and where the Russian stock market and bond markets will be. So as far as the forecast for oil, I mean, I was here in January and I was saying that I do not see the oil going down this year because of the number of factors. I mean, it did rise almost, 40% since the bottom. China is still growing. It's not growing 10%, it's growing 7%, but it's almost at the level of the US in terms of its economy. And because of the ecological factors, they do need oil still to grow. There is still, second thing, there is still no viable alternative to oil. Hence, the world will need oil, and the economy is growing. The world economy is growing, okay, indeed at a lower pace, but the fastest giants like China, they are growing at a big pace, and they need oil. Now, there is going to be a cap on the oil price, as I see it, because the growth is not as big as it's anticipated because of the amount of debt which was issued after the 2008 crisis. So it's capping any real big growth in the developed world economy as I see it. Hence, for the world to justify $100, unless you're going to have a war, which is possible, but I mean, this is not for the forecast. You don't normally take this into consideration. Economically, it's just the offer and demand. And then I think right now the oil price did find its balance. I think $60 is pretty much a right price for this current conditions, for this current environment of the balance between the producers who are, you know, you saw the announcement of OPEC that they are not making any moves, that they're keeping production as they are, which means that they can sustain this level is comfortable enough for them to sustain. What they do, though, at this level of production, what this price does, it marginalizes entirely the shale gas in the US. Because there, everything below $50 is unprofitable. So you're going to have a marginalization of all the US producers, which pushes them down to, not to their knees, but it's just a head above the water, just trying to keep up, but you're not making a lot of money there. So, however, the price can't really go up very much, because if it goes up very much, then they can reopen the taps there as well. So I think that $60 for this year is probably an equilibrium. Where we're going next year, it's, you know, predictions are hard to say, but I would doubt very, very much that longer term, in like the next 2 years, we will be below 60. I think the risks are more on the upside than on the downside. I would not go for 100, but I will be targeting 80 in a 2-year view. That's my personal call.
Mm-hmm. And thank you very much for taking into account this oil price for the months to come, and also the raising of the reserves at the central bank. What perspectives do you see for the Russian stock and bond markets?
Well, the stock market didn't do very well at the announcement. I mean, it did well year to date, but it didn't do very well last week after the announcement, because, of course, if they tell you that the currency is not going to go up, I mean, you know, it's a knee-jerk effect on the stock market. But having said that, what the flip side of this announcement, which means that if the ruble will stay, well, weak, or what people consider weak, this is very good news for all Russian exporters, because the majority of your costs are still in rubles, okay? So even at this oil price, which is 60, which is not 100, which is not 80, Russian oil exporters will have a competitive advantage vis-a-vis other companies in both developed world and emerging market world. Hence, they're very cheap, and I think that there is another variable in the equation, which are sanctions against Russia. I think the sanctions will stay until end of the year for political reasons, even though all the bulk of European companies I'm seeing, they shout that they really don't need the sanctions, but for political reasons, I believe they will stay. So it will have a negative counter impact on the Russian market, so people will probably not go into it straight away. But by the end of the year, you know, you will have this combination that cheap market, sanctions likely to go out. What's happening is that there is very little, well, you know, Russia has little debt on the government level, and reasonable, I would say, debt on the corporate level, and currently they can't invest, they can't take very much because of the sanctions in terms of new debt. So hence, I actually see, I'm very positive both on the bond market and on the equity market. In bond market in hard currency in dollars or in euros, because for rubles, because of the announcement of the interest rates, if your target currency is dollars, I think you probably don't want to be having bonds in rubles. I mean, let's face it. However, all the Russian corporates who have, you know, there are different variables of debts, but, you know, currently we live in Switzerland, you know, on your current bank, on your current account, rate is 0. You do have a lot of Russian corporates, not a lot, but some Russian corporates who give you very, very decent return in Swiss francs on a very short maturity. So I think, yes, there are risks because of the sanctions, but it's priced in. It went up already 30%, but it has more to go, and I'm very positive. And I learned throughout my career that whenever you had big crises like this, you know, typically the next 2 years you continue to make money.
Anastasia Vlasova, thank you very much for being here today and talking about investment opportunities in Russia.
It's a pleasure.
And thanks for watching. Do make sure to keep clicking back on the Dukascopy TV website for latest updates and exclusive interviews. Have a great day and see you next time.